for your patience. Welcome to the latest edition of the AI Credit Webinar Special, the CXO series. Today we have for you Shub Bhowmick, the CEO and co-founder at Tredence, and he'll be talking about the topic, Reimagining the Enterprise of the Future with AI, a Strategic Roadmap. The session is going to be moderated by Sameer Tharnajani, the CEO and co-founder at AI Credit Advisory and Consulting. Before we start, I'd like to take you through a few housekeeping rules. Request you all to please be on mute throughout the entire session. Helps with the speaking and listening experience of everybody. We will be taking questions, but we'll take them towards the end of the session. What I would request you all to do is, if you have any questions, put them onto the panel that you have, the Q&A or the chat panel in WebEx, and I will relay them across to Sameer, who will take them up with Shub. Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to start with a small introduction of Shub. So Shub Bhowmick is the CEO and co-founder of Tredence. Shub has built a career in unlocking value and driving customer impact as a consultant for 20+ years. Under Shub's leadership, Tredence has grown to a 600+ employee organization that focuses on delivering quality insights and decision-making at the last mile. Prior to founding Tredence, Shub held senior executive positions in Diamond Consultants, Mu Sigma, Liberty Advisor Group, and Infosys Technologies. Shub holds an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management and a Bachelor of Technology from IIT BHU. Shub, it's an honor to have you. Thank you so much for making time. Sameer, I hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Rohan, and good to have you, Shub, and thank you so much for joining quite early in the morning. I know in US, and 6 o'clock morning for this kind of a session is something which is a daunting task given the kind of schedules we are all having. So thanks again for this. Shub, just to get the ball rolling, there's a lot which is happening today. Just last 2 months back, every business strategic plan was being rewritten in terms of 2020, in terms of what organizations should be doing. And in the 2 months scenario, what we have seen, everything going bizarre in terms of how things would operate. And you've been closer to the ground in terms of many of the enterprises who are based out of US have a story to tell over there. In terms of pivoting, navigating the change, what is that you're trying to hear, or what is that you're making out in terms of what clients or the enterprises are saying in terms of businesses today?
Yeah, no doubt, Sameer. First of all, thanks a lot for having me. It's an honor to be part of this platform. And by the way, Sameer, many congratulations for starting this journey on your own. I believe when we last time met in Bangalore, you were thinking about something like this. So congratulations. So yeah, it's definitely an unprecedented time. It started with the health crisis out of nothing, and I just saw a report this morning actually, which one of my colleagues posted, that Gartner is saying 2020 IT spend is going to be down by $300 billion, right? So it's definitely something that we are all looking at with very keen eyes. Now, I can tell you how we have been advising our clients to get through this, right? It's really about, so our advice has been in 2 aspects. The first is more around the impact and supply operations in the near term, right? Let's say the last 2 to 3 months, and let's call it the active COVID phase, right? And second is sort of the post-COVID phase, right? As the global economies start to reopen, basically the phase that we are getting into now. But we are all walking into a fairly uncertain economic environment, right? The V-shaped recovery, the U-shaped recovery, or whatever it may be. So how should our customers adapt their business operations into as we enter these new realities, right? So let me first start with the active COVID phase. What are the kind of things we have been doing the last few months, right? So first thing we did was to help our customers set up some war rooms or command centers to enable this, to basically even become ready to kind of deal with this, right? We call it, rapid demand sensing, right? Ability to capture what's going on almost on a real-time basis, right? Which products are selling, where are the demand spikes in terms of product category, by location, by zip code, etc., right? Now, these weren't very advanced data science rich models, but forecasts and estimates that works reasonably well, but in the real time, near real time, right? On the basis of this, when the demand variations are high, companies are also being impacted by supply variations, right? Drivers are not showing up, so you're not able to operate your trucks. There are supply issues related to China, right? Your inventory may be sitting in the wrong DC and all kinds of problems, right? So you're dealing with resource constraints, supply constraints, material constraints. So how do you deal with all that, right? So you have to reallocate the inventory in the most optimal way. And in most cases, your supply is falling short of demand, right? So how do you optimize in a way so that, at least at a minimum, you take care of your most important customers, right? And while you're making these plans, you're giving this plan to the field, right? And the field is, sometimes they are following your prescription, sometimes they are not, right? So on a daily basis, we are creating out of alignment reports, right? Basically, rapid root causing to understand why the plan did not get executed on a certain day. Why was the field executing differently? In some cases, the field was right. So in those cases, you streamline the plans. And in some cases, if you are right, then it's a matter of better compliance, right? So all of these things becomes key solutions that we are providing during the active COVID phase, which more or less we are now starting to ramp down. Now, as we are getting into the post-COVID part of this, the kind of projects that we are executing, the nature of analytics is, as you can imagine, a little bit different, right? Because remember, Samir, post-COVID is not pre-COVID. Now, the world has changed. It's not the same as it used to be. A lot of things are going to change, right? Including your consumer and customer behavior, right? So, and the thing is, companies will need help with new blueprints how they will operate, right? Because the way they used to run their business, and let's talk supply chain first. Let's say the rates, the volumes, the product mix combinations, all of that will need significant revisions. The benchmarks have basically changed, right?
So, just if I may chime in, Shubhan, you
Sure.
gave a very fantastic narrative in terms of the supply chain and also the immediate response from the players like you in terms of sensing the signals when this whole COVID stuck in terms of, I would say, pandemic. Now, over there, when we look at some of these aspects, and I'll drill down towards the theme later, but there is one fact over there which is really kind of significant, which is look, the digital adoption, analytics adoption was kind of a, let's say, at different, I would say, stages for many of the clients you serve and many of the companies you kind of meet and many of the prospects. Will that accelerate with this kind of a, let's say, pandemic being the new norm and other black swan events which one can foresee in the near future? Or do you believe the enterprises will still be in a status quo mode to conserve cash and really look at being more cautious rather than accelerating their digital analytics agenda?
I think Samir, you meant it as a leading question. It's absolutely will accelerate, right? Because um, let's face it, right? Fundamentally, because of the health situation, we all want to social distance, physical distance, right? We want to spend, unfortunately, as less time as possible in large crowds in the middle of other people, right? Because we don't want to contract the disease. So, as a result of this, we are going to see less and less of, physical, any businesses that operated on the basis of physical proximity. So that business potentially will be impacted. And then digital businesses where the customer engagement and the customer transaction is happening digitally online will increase, right? And we are seeing this across the board. I mean, just think about this, right? Let's say you go into a restaurant to order food, let's say a pickup restaurant, or rather, a fast food restaurant. You walk into the store. First thing you would do is look up at the menu and see what's there, and then make your selection. In the new world, you'll be doing exactly the same thing, but you will be doing it digitally, right? So and that will create more data, right? And when data gets created, companies will need analysts and data scientists to analyze it and to make sense of it, right? The short answer is absolutely. It can only increase the amount of AI analytics that is out there, right? And so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, as this, let's say in addition to health crisis, we are also entering into an economic crisis, right? We are likely entering a recession, or we are already in a recession. So that would mean there is going to be a great deal of conservatism as much as cost is concerned, right? I think even that mindset, the cloud migration, right? AI transformation into cloud, that is not going to slow down. There might be a small blip in the short term, but after things stabilize, you will see your CIOs and CEOs and CFOs, they will continue to fund the cloud migration projects at a minimum, right? Because on the cloud, the pay-as-you-go pricing models, which allows for much greater flexibility of scaling up and down. That's exactly what global 2000 companies will continue to look for, right? And these flexibilities do not exist in the traditional pricing models of on-prem Teradata or IBM, right? So let me take a pause there. Did I answer your question?
Yes, yes. And if I just add in terms of taking a bit, another dimension I want to throw and take your viewpoints. Now, strategically, in the last couple of years, we've seen that change where analytics AI has become a board conversation because with the sophistication of, uh, I would say, the quantum computing power, and also in terms of large complex problems getting solved with analytics AI in terms of more mature adoption scenarios, the level of conversations with the CXOs and boards where they're saying, look, we take decisions today, and a lot of those decisions are being taken by intuition, gut, all those hunches, and even influenced by the board in terms of how it operates. Over there, subtly, analytics AI is being able to throw those radical kind of insights, intelligence, recommendations through the engines which are cranking up within the enterprise. Now, in this scenario, the question is more kind of, let's say to you, will this piece of decision making through analytics AI will be more proliferated in terms of both CXOs looking at this, or you believe it's still far away, or they'll have some other focus or priority areas in terms of looking at this?
Yeah. I think I got your question. So I agree, Samir, right? I think more and more CEOs will are now willing to spend on analytics and AI-driven transformations, right? Else, if they are not, then they're being prompted by their board to do so, right? I mean, in fact, in a lot of earnings calls these days, there would now be questions about AI, even though the company is a traditional non-tech company, right? And I'm sure we all have seen all the predictions from IDCs and Gartners of the world on how much companies are going to spend on these things the next 5 years, right? But having said that, it's also shifting, right? 5 years back, 3 years back, even 3 years back, CEOs will hire a team of PhD data scientists. They would be running a lot of experiments and POCs in some corner room hidden from the rest of the company. But most of them would never scale and become anything meaningful in terms of value, right? That's, I think, changing now, right? At least as far as the conversations I am having, CEOs are now looking for dividends, right? So there is a lot greater emphasis on, let's say, repeatability, reusability, scaling the AI capability, right? So the initial hype is tempering down, and companies are now looking for more practical, more impactful, scalable analytics solutions, right? Basically, how do you generate insights more efficiently and at scale, right? If delivering a certain insight took 100 hours the first time, can you reduce it down to 50 the second time and 10 hours the third time and so on, right? Increasing need to speed up the time to outcomes, right? While increasing accuracy and reliability of the process. So yeah.
Sure, sure. No, I think you're right when I mean, it's the adoption and the whole scenario piece in AI analytics, which is definitely calling for a next paradigm in terms of more time to market, more kind of, let's say, ROI driven. But there's also one piece over there, which is going back to our main theme today, and you said as part of your earlier narrative, there is also reimagining of the enterprise which is happening today.
Mm-hmm.
CXOs, business stakeholders, decision makers are saying, look, traditional ways, and you mentioned that very rightly in your earlier narrative, how we consume today, some of the how we transact is going to change radically. Now, over there, the underpinning of these transformation, when we talk about businesses, value chains, will be all analytics, all AI. Now, from your viewpoint, and it will be good if you can also share what's the viewpoint, what Tredence bring for the prospects, for your existing clients, and also for our participants, that what's the unique value differentiators, propositions you have, and how do you see this driving the transformation for the clients from an AI analytics perspective?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, consumption and adoption, I think, has been the holy grail in our industry, right? We've all heard about analytics projects that have failed and money wasted because it was never consumed by business users. And let's look at the various forms of adoption, right? And I'll get to your question about Tredence in a second. So in the executive reporting space, right, which is creating PowerPoint stories, creating Tableau dashboards. I think the advent of Tableau, whenever that happened, about 10 years back, or maybe 7 or 8 years back, and eventually in a Power BI and Domo and other visualization tools, that significantly improved the quality of adoption, at least in that executive reporting space, right? But however, in more, let's say, the standard operational decisioning space, right, where the decision needs to be made by a line user, let's say the logistics guy who is choosing, which shipper to use to ship a certain cargo, or the sales guy who is trying to decide which customer to prioritize, right? Let's say an outside sales rep. Um, I think it has been much harder to inject analytics in those decisions, right? Um, what we have found to be most successful in these situations is if you could make that really easy, right? The decision making really easy, and as much as possible, integrate that with the current platform, right? For example, a B2B company, that we worked with recently, we were able to reduce churn by integrating a map-based platform, which the sales guy could see on his or her tablet, and that was accessible within Salesforce.com, right? So how well you can integrate and how easy you can make the consumption process. I believe it's fundamentally about that, right? Um, and there also have been situations where you have to be as even more prescriptive, right? There was one project I remember a couple of years back where it was a supply chain analytics project, where we had to literally print out physical copies of the key decision criteria, and those were letter boards of their cubicles, right? So the adoption question, the million dollar question in our industry, I think has to be that onion has to be peeled in different ways depending on the situation, right? Can I get to the Tredence part of your question now?
Sure.
So at Tredence, see, in fact, thanks for that introduction earlier. You talked about, Tredence, and you mentioned about our emphasis on last mile, the importance of last mile consumption of analytics, right? That's a fundamental differentiator for us, right? Whatever we do, most of our projects, there is a significant amount of emphasis on that last mile, right? Um, most of the projects that we execute, obviously there are components of building the model and finding the right accuracy and so on. But our engineers will also work hand in hand with our data scientists in building the larger solution, where the emphasis is not just on the creating the model, but creating the full stack solution around it, so that the end users can actually use a decisioning dashboard to make their decisions, right? I can go into more such examples if you would like, but Samir, I hope I have been able to answer your question.
Sure. And in that context, Shub, and you gave a very good kind of what I would say, what I want to pick up, being more prescriptive and also peeling the onion really in terms of solving those last mile problems for the clients. And I want to ask a more of an industry questions. And fortunately, we had access to the AI leaders, and just like you, we had some previous sessions with the AI leaders. And one of the common questions I've asked and would like to hear your thoughts around that, the industry in terms of analytics AI today, in terms of the providers, is very fragmented, and it's been there for quite some time. You've got those IT players, consulting players, pure play players, as we have. If I just bracketize Tradens as a pure play analytics AI player, then we've got startups. We also have the global capability centers doing. How does this whole industry looks like? Aren't we confusing the clients, prospects, industry as a whole? Because just like IT and consulting, there is a demarcation today, but we don't see that today in analytics AI. And I just want to hear that. What's your view in terms of simplification and demystification of this industry landscape?
Yeah. So, our industry for a long time has been called pure play analytics, right? Um, and to be honest, I am not a big fan of the term pure play, and I'll tell you why, right? I think it'll
I
help.
want you to be open about this. Yeah, good to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's related to the question you're asking me as well. Um, because in today's world, right, 10 years back, even 5 years back, when a significant majority of our deliverables were, Tableau and PowerPoint decks, maybe that definition would have been apt, but not anymore, right? Uh, because it's tough to say we do only data science or analytics or AI or data engineering, right? Because in more and more projects that we execute, clients are really asking for, end-to-end help in their transformation journeys, right? So a lot of our engagements would start with, let's say, that advisory and the road mapping work to identify the AI use cases and then prioritize them, right, based on certain strategic and operational business drivers, right? Then from an execution perspective, we may first need to migrate data, right, from on-prem to cloud and massage and prepare the data for consumption, right, analytics, data science, or downstream application development, right? Then our data team members, right, our data scientists would then work on model development, but not just development, deployment of the models, right? I'm sure you've heard about ML engineering and ML operations, right? So that you can do these things at scale, right? And then, more often than not, we would also work actively on change management, partnering with the client to socialize and evangelize these efforts to drive adoption, right? So all of these things are happening in sprints, in an agile manner, so that you can continue to secure sort of the business validations along the journey, right? So from a skills perspective, you have data engineers, you have data scientists, domain specialists, right? ML engineers, UI developers, this team sort of working together in building these capabilities, right? And this is the future. I think the lines are blurred. Samir, maybe at some level you can, I think your question is valid. Is there a bit of confusion? Are the IT guys now starting to do more and more AI, and the AI guys starting to do a fair bit of data migration and data engineering work? That is the reality, right? And I think they will have their strengths, we will have our strengths. I think in our case, our strengths will be the emphasis on understanding the functional context, right? Having the domain specialists who are approaching that problem not as a technical problem, but as a business problem. But that, the confusion, the eventual sort of, consolidation of these two spaces may happen. Obviously, I don't think the analytics companies will ever try to do, let's say, pure transactional systems like an ERP system. That is something we would never be interested in. But in the data engineering space, I think sort of that merger is going to happen.
Great. So no, I think you put a good viewpoint, and I'm also conscious of the questions which are coming in show. And just want to add, because that's a question we have from one of the participants. With the viewpoint, what you said about this whole landscape of the industry, in the time to come, do you also foresee some consolidation happening? Are there some M&As which will redefine the industry? So what would be the scenario in terms of consolidation if that happens? So that's a question we have from one of the participants, and I think it's pertinent as you mentioned about your viewpoint over there.
Yeah. Yes, I think the consolidation is going to come. That actually could be one of the unfortunate things that may also happen as a result of this crisis, because some of the smaller companies which are potentially struggling with their cash situations, will be potentially, bought by some of the larger companies. So consolidation will happen, and this COVID crisis, if anything, may actually accelerate that consolidation process. But see, in general, if you look at our industry today, right, it is still heavily dominated by the large, IT giants, right? The Accentures of the world. And then obviously we talked about the pure play analytics companies, right? And we have our own niche around this space, right? And then you have the traditional Indian IT companies, the Infosys and the Tatas of the world, who are also trying to get into this space, right? So the consolidation will happen. And especially when you see a lot of companies in that sort of sub $20 million revenue range, it is quite possible that a lot of those will eventually get acquired, right? So yeah.
Sure, sure. So shifting gears, Shub, and In the whole COVID scenario, I think the consumption, how analytics AI would move forward would be a bit different. And I can take some of the earlier narrative, what you mentioned. Now, from a specific industry viewpoints, and you gave some illustrations about hospitality and kind of restaurant business, how it would move. What would be the set of industries you believe would see an uptick in terms of demand of analytics AI adoption? And also, if you would like to share some highlights about the business functions. I mean, you gave some examples about how the touch points about the customers, given it will be more contactless, will be more imminent. So, what's your viewpoint in terms of industries and business functions adopting analytics AI in a big way post this kind of a crisis, or even while we are going through this crisis period?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let me start with the function horizontal question, and then I'll talk about both the verticals, right? So from a functional perspective, I think supply chain will see a lot of demand, right? Because as a result of COVID, uh, the global supply chains and international trade, it's going to shorten, right? I think a lot of I'm sure you all, a lot of you have heard chatters about, the dependence on China being the manufacturing hub. In the longer term, that might be the case, but at least in the next 1 to 2 years, that may shift a little bit, right? Go ahead.
No, no, go ahead.
Okay. Chief supply chain officers will need to redesign their S&OP blueprints, right? How they're thinking about their sales operations and planning, right? Tariffs and taxes will further complicate these things, right? We keep hearing about some new tariffs on China, prospective tariffs on China from the legislative body in the U.S., right? So I think providers can develop expertise in these areas and help their clients think through these disruptions and help their clients execute their supply chain operations with greater agility, right? Because it's all about being as agile as possible, right? You don't want to sign long-term fixed contracts anymore. You want part of them to be fixed, part of them to be more, reactionary, and then part of them to be spot, right? Obviously, the price points will be different on based on what type of contract you are executing, but you have to keep that flexibility with you, and it's a matter of finding that right combination, right? Moving on, I think digital transformation will continue to be a pervasive topic, guys, right? We have picked up quite a few clients actually in the last couple of months, believe it or not, where the company was a traditional physical, business model dependent company. One of them is actually a gym, right? A gym. Now it's starting an online version, and they have reached out to us for help in sort of doing the underlying customer analytics to support their online business, right? Basically social distancing and the fear of contracting the virus, as I was talking about earlier, due to physical proximity, will fundamentally change consumer behavior, guys, right? Even likely in the medium to long term, right? Definitely until we see a vaccination or some kind of herd immunity catch up, and eventually we are not scared of this anymore, right? So industries that have predominantly provided their services in person will now do so via digital methods, right? In the healthcare provider space, for example, if I may talk a little bit in terms of verticals now, but healthcare is going to be one industry which will definitely see a lot of action, right? The biotechs, we are hearing about the biotechs now on an everyday basis, and what are the new drugs they're coming up with, right? But not just the biotechs, the payers, basically the insurers, as well as the hospitals and providers, right, will continue to transform their services, right? In the provider space, I'm sure you guys have heard about more and more outpatient services are now being provided by digital platforms, right? But in general, I think more digital data will get created that the analytics and AI industry will need to systematically help their clients make sense of. And I think these trends will create some very interesting opportunities for all of us.
Wonderful, wonderful. No, I think that's good to know what you said. So some of the key areas, what you highlighted, make sense in terms of how the next level of demand may open up from these industries and horizontals. Also, as part of the narrative, which what you mentioned, and I have a question around that, is about the models of engagements. Now, what we've seen today has been a traditional, as you know, kind of an annuity business with a kind of a time and effort kind of a, let's say, piece, and also in terms of building a center of excellence. Now, the scenario today is a bit uncertain for the clients, and there is a bit of ambiguity. Do you foresee and envisage new models of engagements coming in analytics, in AI kind of, let's say, businesses where it could be more ROI based, output kind of driven, more kind of specific to a certain kind of a, let's say, threshold of the work, what the provider brings to the table? What is your viewpoint over there, Shub?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I have a slightly controversial point of view on this, um, but I would rather speak my mind. So, this whole engagement model in our industry has already been shifting, right? Very quickly. I mean, if you look at 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, the preeminent engagement model in the analytics services industry has been, longer term retainer contracts, right? Analytics extension teams. Um, the service offering was about becoming an analytics partner, a vendor that can provide relevant skills and volume, right, in order to support an existing operational mandate led by the client, right? This service offering was not about, typically, it was not about capability development. In most cases, in fact, there wasn't much strategic about this, right? I think that has been changing for a while, even before this COVID crisis started, right? And I think the traditional retainer and extension team based business model is already shrinking, right? Because clients now have much greater expectations, guys, right? Because for us, because as far as meeting the traditional needs, they are setting up their own captives, right, in India to serve that purpose, right? Which in most cases can be cheaper for them, right? So
But I've
what they
also seen, just to chime in, many of the captives and these GCCs using the AI analytics providers to shore up or bolster their capability, and also to ensure that they're not losing the time and in terms of kind of really making an impact for their parent organization. Isn't that true, or what you see as well?
we have seen that, right? But we have also seen that sometimes our profitability model, doesn't work very well, especially in those situations, right? And even if it does, it's somewhat temporary, right? But if you really want to create a strong, long-term, permanent, nothing is permanent, but let's say something that is sustainable in terms of your capabilities, um, I have a different point of view. I think what we need to do as an industry is start becoming more and more specialized, right? Practice-driven engagements where, as providers, we are driving or participating in larger scale transformational programs, right?
Very
Uh,
true. Yeah.
which is typically a roadmap of several projects, right? And we need to take greater responsibility to deliver the mandate within the cost, obviously within the cost and timeline boundaries, right? And since the value created in these situations, it's not just about providing skills and bandwidth, but it's because the value is being delivered on the basis of your specialized knowledge, right? We are, more often than not, we are actually able to ask for better pricing, which also helps us from a margin perspective, right? And it also allows us to explore more strategic partnerships and engagement constructs with our clients. In fact, you mentioned the gain sharing model. We have started to explore those things as well, where our revenue and upside is partly driven by the value that is delivered by the project, right? It's a win-win for both the
Do
client
you
and
see
the
a
vendor.
traction from the conversations you had with the clients on this gain sharing model?
Can you repeat that question, Samir?
So, do you see an inclination from the clients in terms of taking this gain sharing model forward as part of their entire buy-in?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. We are seeing that, especially on the supply chain and more operations projects, we are seeing more and more, keen clients are keen about those, right? And, the larger companies in our industry, some of the names I mentioned earlier, they're already doing this, right? The McKinseys and the Accentures of the world, they have been doing this for a while, right? And if we want to really be part of those large programs or drive those large programs, lead those large programs, lead our clients through success, then we have to align our incentives with theirs, right? I'm not saying put your entire fee at risk, but you have to be open to the idea of putting part of your fee at risk, which shows your skin in the game, right? Now, if your question is because of COVID, are we seeing more of these kind of demands coming? The answer is yes, right?
Hmm.
Because there is greater cash is king in these ecosystems, right? No one wants to pay upfront. No one wants to take that risk, right? So in fact, there is one new project engagement rather we are kicking off as a gain sharing as we speak, because the client said, hey, it's hard for me to secure the funding for a project, large project like this, but if we can get aligned on a gain sharing construct, then let's do it, right? Having said that, I'll just add one more thing to this, because it's tricky to execute, right? Because let's say you deliver some savings for the client, and the client says, hey, and then something happens because of which the clients also lets go a bunch of people, right? So let's say then it becomes a question, then it becomes a potential an arbitration, right? Were the savings because of what you delivered as part of the program, or was it because of some other external event that you had less control over, right? So the point I'm trying to make is it's very important to have C-level sponsorship for these kind of projects and programs, so that you are working with a sponsor who is aligned with you as far as the success of the project is concerned. Right. Let me take a pause there. Yeah.
Great, great. No, I think that's a well said thing from your side. So one of the questions I want to take, Shub, which is kind of a stream of subject we haven't touched, is about there is, while we look at one landscape, which is analytics AI providers, solution kind of, let's say, kind of aspects, but there is a whole stream of players who are into products, kind of platforms, off the shelf kind of, let's say, solutions. And they're also trying to make a distinct mark in terms of identifying problems and offer those kind of containerized solutions to the clients from analytics AI perspective.
Mhm.
How do you see that stream of providers coming into the market? Do you see some kind of a, let's say, conflict with the existing, or do you think there is a buy-in from the client, or do you think they're still in a prototype, figuring out mode, and it will take some time for them to be more mature in terms of their overall kind of market strategies?
So let me understand your question, Samir. So are you asking, let's say, a services company like Tredence developing a product versus a product company trying to solve the same problem as a product company? Do I see a conflict between these two kinds of providers? Is that the question?
Yes, and that specifically when that product company is also launching analytics AI based products from the set of data they have or from the market demands what they see. So how do you see that scenario, which is a part of the question emerging?
Yeah, of course, that conflict exists. In fact, just yesterday, I was part of a new conversation for one of our clients where um, the discussion is between taking an existing customer engagement platform versus building it from scratch, right? And as you guys can imagine, customer engagement platform would be a combination of a CDP, a customer journey platform, maybe some kind of a VOC module, right? And a combination of all that, right? So when a client is making a decision on that sort of a transformation journey, right? One of the key considerations for the sponsor is how quickly can I deliver this, build this capability, right? Or rather, implement this capability in my ecosystem, in my context, without undertaking a lot of risk, right? So from that perspective, obviously, a product will typically bode well for him or her because it is meant to have 50 as much quite a bit of capabilities sort of that's pre-built, right? So you only have to customize or configure the remaining X%, right? But having said that, I think that's where the opportunity is also for services companies for like us, right? And by no means am I suggesting that, hey, services companies should become product companies because that's not our DNA, right? We thrive in a high touch, services engagement model. We love problem solving, right? We don't have the product DNA, especially from a go-to-market perspective, right? So we'll never become a company that is making most of our revenue from a SaaS, let's say, subscription product. That's not happening.
Hmm.
But having said that, our opportunity, guys, is on the basis of our ability to specialize, right? So I'll tell you what we are doing at Tredence, right? So we go to market with a practice mindset, right? So our practice leads who will typically, specialize in a certain vertical or functional domain. Now they start developing capabilities, right? In some cases, the capabilities could be frameworks. In some cases, they could be a real technical capability and accelerator that you can touch and feel, right? So what this does is this enables us to deliver our products at much faster speeds, right? While lowering execution risks, which is what the clients are looking for, right? And it also helps us in building on top of continuously improving and improving these capabilities over a period of time, right?
Right, right.
Uh, yeah, and a lot of these
You
capabilities
said it
today.
right. I think it's,
Go ahead.
sorry. No, why don't you finish actually? Yeah.
I'm saying today, a lot of these larger capability development, it's like working with Lego blocks, right? Where you have to put together various components, various things, right? And you also have to do it in such a way that the cost incurred for the client is minimal, right? So if the client already has a good ecosystem of those Lego blocks, then as services companies, our leveraging our specialization, we have to put those Lego blocks together in solving those problems in the most cost-effective way.
True, true. So there is one interesting question which have come in, Shub, and I want to really take that. You mentioned in the beginning about almost about $300 million from tech spend going out because of this Black Swan event.
Yeah.
The question is that look, 5G is also on the anvil, and that may proliferate the usage of AI because a lot of that use cases around 5G will be kind of led by AI. So, do you see in the time to come, and this is not like immediate, that particular spend, while it went away from whatever reason of this Black Swan event, may be hedged against this particular new offering coming in where AI could be at the forefront in terms of how 5G unveils and kind of gets more into the market?
Yeah. By the way, the number I quoted earlier at the beginning of the call was 300 billion, not million, which I'm seeing it's a Forbes article. That seems a little high though. So I'll have a look and reconfirm that. And I also, encourage your audience to do
We're
so.
talking about from that $2.4 trillion spend which happens, right? Which is the overall technology spend. So I
Quite
think
like,
300
yeah,
billion looks a bit kind of
yeah,
okay. Maybe you go back and kind of
yeah.
just integrate that number. Sure, please go.
But coming to your question again, I am to be honest, I am not a telecom guy. We do work with a few telecom companies, but I would not consider us to be very deep telecom experts, at least just as yet. See the 5G phenomenon. It's going to come. It's going to happen, guys. Right? If anything, I think thanks to the extremely high demand on the infrastructure, as more and more of us are trying to work from home, right? It's only going to accelerate that transition, right? And we are also seeing some very interesting deals. I'm sure you guys have heard about the new Facebook 10% deal with Reliance Jio, right? And because the level of interest in this space, based on what I hear from my friends in the private equity cycles, is still very high. And I believe that the 5G revolution is going to come. Now, in the US especially, I think from an infrastructure perspective, we are still behind, compared with some of the other world economies. So there is going to be a lot of catch up. And as a result of that catch up, I think a lot of new opportunities also will get created, even for our analytics industry. So it'll be an interesting space to keep an eye open to.
Wonderful. Sure, we have 5 minutes before we close, and I have two questions. One is more strategic, just to complete the theme of our discussion. So, in your view, and this is AI leaders speaking about this particular aspect, reimagining the enterprise, the future enterprise, where AI will be the forefront, will be at the fulcrum, will be more a strategic lever. What are the few strategic consideration you believe business leaders need to keep in mind to accelerate their journey in terms of AI adoption?
Yeah, yeah. So I think a lot of companies struggle with that AI journey. I can talk about one engagement we did, which started with an advisory work, right, where we identified AI use cases, um, while talking to a number of business leaders, right? On the basis of that, we kind of put those business cases together, and then we help them prioritize them, based on what business needed in the near term and the long term horizon perspective, right? But the lack of mature sort of governance organization, right? Which is focusing on these AI investments, right? I feel that has somewhat deterred this space, right? So I anticipate that more and more sort of AI organizations, we obviously we are very familiar with titles like chief data officers and chief digital officers. Maybe some of these guys can take over those roles as well. But I anticipate some, more leadership is needed in our space who can lead this mandate, not as a provider like us, right? Because it's hard to play that role from the outside, but as an insider who has a seat on the board along with the rest of the C-suite, and is able to, become, enabler, and drive the budget for these kind of transformational journeys.
Wonderful. Sure. Last question, and this has come from one of the participants, and it's a direct one, and I want to take that. You mentioned about this change about some of these models around output-based gain sharing. Now, in the scenario we are all living in, do you also anticipate clients getting a bit impatient ranting out in terms of the ROI of those tangible results from engagements not coming in? What's your viewpoint?
So you mean the impact not coming, or there is a
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. So and I think where there is a difference of opinion as far as what that impact is. Yes, that is happens. That actually happens quite frequently, even, and this has nothing to do with COVID. Any gain sharing construct requires a sort of very clear definition of how you will measure the impact, right? And then I previously mentioned it also requires some C-suite support who is aligned with you in terms of what success means, right? And you know, if let's and it doesn't necessarily have to impact the entire company, right? It could be a business unit, right? A Fortune 500 company with a $100 million business unit. We are actually talking to one client who has that kind of a setup. That's okay, right? Because as long as you can draw, you can measure the success of that $100 million business unit, right? That's fine, right? But having the ability to at least logically draw those lines is important for you to measure success and the impact that you're creating as part of the program, right? So yeah, that's important, and sometimes that can be challenging. Samir.
Wonderful. Shub, I think we would have loved to continue, but we are top of the hour. But I must say, I think the spectrum of themes, what we covered, and the kind of narrative you had, I think there's so much of insights you provided in terms of how does this whole reimagining the enterprise works, where AI is at the forefront and it's at the fulcrum of the strategies, and also in terms of the viewpoint what you gave in terms of how CXOs look at AI as more as a powerful tool and as a secret sauce for the organization. To the stage we talked about these engagements, how it would look like in future in terms of the gain sharing or even ROI or output based, to the aspects about also if it's not getting to the expectations what the client needs, then what exactly needs to be done. Wonderful having that conversation, Shub, and wish you all the best for Tredence in the time to come. Thank you so much for being up in the morning at your time, and thank you so much for being on this session, please.
I enjoyed the opportunity. Thanks for having me, Samir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.